Okay, so let's get started. So welcome everybody to our concluding session in this really nice series we've been having with Mark Schenker on this short fiction. Uh, Once again, I want to thank the generosity of the Quigley family. These literary series are made possible by the generosity of the literary series in memory of Amy Quigley. And you've all been a great audience, and I hope you've been enjoying the various selections that we've picked out. And I hope you had a chance to read Foster. I read it yesterday. It's a beautiful little book, easy and quick, and I hope a lot of you had a chance to read it. I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and we'll get started. It'll be a similar program where he's going to talk for a little bit and then elicit comments or questions out of all of you, and you can use the Q&A button as we all do each time. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this. Thank you for having me back. Thank the funding. Thank the Wilton Library. Thank the patrons who come back again and again. I'm going to say just a few things about Clare Keegan and the novel, and then a little bit more about coming of age novels relative to this book. And then I'm going to sort of set the table for Foster, which was published in 2010. So we've come into the 21st century with this book. She was born in 1968. The novel is set in 1981. One significance of that, and it's dated by the fact that there's violence against strikers, there are internal events that you can date the setting of the novel, is that, as you may know, any kind of contraception or birth control was outlawed in Ireland from 1935 to 1985. Not just forbidden by the Roman Catholic Church, illegal by the government until 1985. And so the fact that this is set in 81, I may have that date wrong. It may have been outlawed till 1980, but it explains why the unnamed narrator's mother is having more children than she probably would like to have with her ineffective husband, but she would have no choice as an Irish woman, Catholic or otherwise, but she's Catholic in 1980s Ireland. It was published in a short version earlier in 2010 in the New Yorker, and then expanded and published in the fall in the longer version. It was greeted with almost universal acclaim. It got so many accolades that the Department of Education and Training in Ireland put it on their learning certificate exam. That is the examination students take in public high schools to qualify for applying to entrance to university. So it got a lot of great attention nationwide. And although she had been known as a short story writer, publishing in the New Yorker and other places, this book cemented her reputation. It was turned into a movie made in Gaelic, in Irish, called The Quiet Girl in 2022. It was Ireland's entry for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. It was the only Irish-produced, Irish-language film that ever was awarded that honor to be nominated as Ireland's candidate. It lost to All Quiet on the Western Front, a remake that year, but it's a movie I recommend to you. It's called The Quiet Girl because if you were to read the story again and only mark the times that the girl talks rather than narrates in her head to us, which she does throughout the entire book, you realize she doesn't say much in terms of dialogue that you would hear on the stage or in a movie theater, called The Quiet Girl. It's a very, very impressive movie, and the young woman who plays the narrator is splendid. I want to step back and just say a coming of age story can define itself in many ways. What is the marker of coming of age? Sometimes it's the conventional markers that you've reached some kind of adulthood, often an understanding of your family, sometimes a marker like getting a job, moving out from home, getting married or partnered, having a child, whether married or not. Often, though, it has something to do, whether as part of those categories or independent of that, with some understanding that we would recognize as an adult view of the world, some kind of maturation. Now, this girl is pre adolescent. I would guess that she's about 10 or 11. She's precocious. One marker of that is that we're in her head for the entire book, and she's very smart about on the way to this place in chapter one. She imagines what um, Mrs. Kinsella will look like, knowing she's of her mother's clan. Uh, she thinks when they're walking and not talking that they're walking the way people walk when they're unhappy. And then she corrects that and says, or people can be quietly walking when they're happy. She knows she's in a new environment. She says a new place means new words. So she's very precocious. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's fair to say that she's probably not older than 10 or 11. We can we can debate that, but I'm not sure it'd be very profitable. So one marker of coming of age is when someone realizes what most people realize sometime in their childhood. The way you were brought up is not universal for everyone. It can be something trivial, like the way you do Sunday dinner, whether or not you say grace at the table, whether or not you're watching TV at the table, whether mom and dad sit down with you at the table, whether you're required to ask permission to leave the table, and so on. Sometimes you discover the first time you're invited to a friend's house, gee, not everybody does Sunday dinner the way that we do. But more significantly, it's things about how families interact. So she knows that this couple, the Kinsellas, Edna and Dan, are better off financially than her family is. And one advantage the movie has is you see both her home at the end of the movie, and you see the Kinsellas' home throughout the movie, and it's quite a big difference. Her mother, the girl's mother, is dressed like a modest or impoverished farm woman. Mrs. Kinsella dresses like a business executive. She's wearing clothes that you would think that she might work in a bank or a company. And the house is very well appointed. When you read the novel, you have to imagine that. When you see a movie, they do that for you. But one marker of coming of age is she learns that her way of having lived, her family's way of having lived, her upbringing, is not necessarily universal across all families in Ireland, let alone the world. And she learns things like when Dan Kinsella says, no two men are alike. She learns something about self respect when he has the brilliant idea of having her race down to the mailbox and back, knowing instinctively somehow that it will give her confidence. One of the ways they bond. Uh, she may not have figured out that Stella is her embarrassment about the bedwetting by making the story wedding mattresses and a Weetabix being good for your complexion when in fact it's supposed to be good for continence. But whether she realizes the kindness of those things or not, this is not the world that she grew up in. And that's her coming of age. She realizes her father is not the only kind of father that there is. A man who doesn't hug her, who's an alcoholic, who's a gambler, who's a ne'er do well, I think it's fair to say. And of course, the last scene has the poignancy of the two dads being in the same frame and how she's negotiating, saying goodbye to one while she has some fear of the other. So I'll stop there and say that I hope you found it as remarkable a novel as I do. It's 8 short chapters, pages not bigger than your hand, 88 pages. You could read it in an hour and a half if you were in a hurry. I will say, like most great literature, it rewards a second read. There's a lot going on in the way she frames her own consciousness. But because it's a novel that is our last book of the series and a novel that I think is very accessible, it's not complicated, it's not elusive with lots of references to things and histories and myths that you have to look up. I'm hoping there'll be a good conversation with all of you. And so I'll turn it over to questions and comments with Michael being Phil Donahue.
Okay, folks, feel free to, here we go. Here's one right off. Mark Kelly says, "This was a great story. Thanks so much. The story is summed up by the bracketing of, quote, part of me wants my father to leave me here, while another part of me wants him to take me back to what I know. At a point where the girl calls her father, quote, her father, and, quote, da, to where she has, quote, learned enough, grown enough to know that what happened is not something I need ever mention, and calls Kinsella daddy, which she has never considered calling her biological father."
Yeah, and I will say thank you, Zoe. I want to say thanks for that comment. I want to say that another marker of coming to age is when you figure out a way, either on your own or with the help of siblings or maybe teachers or social workers or members of your family that are adults, how you negotiate what you like and don't like about your family or what you gravitate to and what you're pulling away from. And Robert Frost said famously, family, home is where when you go there, they have to take you in. They have no choice. Well, some families don't take people in. And one of the things this book registers is she's only in the Kinsella's home for part of the summer. She didn't know where she was going exactly. She certainly didn't know how long she was going and when they'd come back to get her. And it's an open question that we can discuss about what next summer is going to be like. But she has to try to negotiate the fact that her family is still her family. She has siblings at home who presumably she cares about, a mother who I think she loves, that she's not going to abandon. She, again, is only 10 or 11. It's not like she's about to go off to school. And yet she has this great attraction to this other couple who are incredibly sensitive foster parents having lost their own child.
And Susan's asking a question about the ending. Uh, how does her father react and treat her after Kinsella leaves?
Yeah. So, in the interest of this time, I'm going to answer questions that are put to me, even though other people might want to weigh in. I have a reading of what happens in the 9th chapter of this book, which doesn't exist. In other words, I have written for myself what happens to this girl in the future, and I can make an argument that I find persuasive. But one thing is the father is an emotional idiot. He's not just a drunkard and a gambler and a bad provider, hasn't been able to manage to get the hay in. And we learn all that in the first chapter that he doesn't um, that he gambles, that he's an alcoholic, that he's not a good father. I believe he's not attentive enough to his life to hold grudges. He's upset about what's happening in his home when the Kinsellas are there because their presence shames him in a way that he can only act out about. So when he says he had a liquid supper, he's partly showing off. And when he sees that when she's leaving, or when the Kinsellas are leaving, the girl is running down the driveway to embrace them or embrace the father, that bothers him because he reacts to what he sees. But I think it's very likely that the next morning when he wakes up, the only memory he'll have is that he will badmouth them and he will make disparaging comments about the girl. I don't think he has the emotional complexity to hold a grudge. I believe that in answer to this question, why of the several children that the mother had, did she decide to send this one to the Kinsellas? Why this girl? I think the reason is she knew enough about this girl to know that she was the one who would benefit most from this brief vacation with loving parents in a good home. Someone in a library said to me some years ago that she probably was too young to be of significant help with the infant baby and the new baby on the way. And that answer doesn't seem very credible, since she does a lot of things with the Kinsella, and all families, not just Irish families, are famous for having children of all ages help out. I think the mother, in her being overwhelmed with her own circumstances, tried to save this daughter who is remarkable. She's the restless one. In the beginning of the movie, they show her running out into a field and disappearing into the woods, and the voiceover in Gaelic with English subtitles talks about they always had to try to find her because she was restless. And that restlessness is part of her intelligence, and part of any good mother's knowledge of her children is that she knows their talents and their weaknesses. And I think the mother sent this girl off to her cousin and her husband, not because they missed a son and she's trying to give them a surrogate, but because she wants her daughter to have a good summer. And I would be willing to bet that next summer she goes back.
Great. So Sarah is asking, could you talk about the expansion from the New Yorker to the novella, and how did that avoid putting in too much detail?
Yeah. I can't, who is that, Sarah?
Sarah,
Sarah, it's an excellent question, but I confess that it's so long ago that I read the New Yorker article, the New Yorker version, that I can't tell you how they differ. I'm sorry. It is a very good question. It's an interesting question for anyone who cares about revision, but I can't answer it. I don't know what was added. I will say that the title foster is sometimes used to talk about the child. Foster children are sometimes abbreviated to "I was a foster." Although my mother was alive in my childhood, she was not in a position to take care of me. And so I was actually raised in an unlicensed, unofficial, but very loving foster home for the first 11 years of my life. And it was commonplace to call the children of such a place fosters. But foster, of course, is also what the parents do, what the fostering parents do. And foster, of course, is a verb, to foster. Good parents foster, even if they're the they're the birth mother and father, they foster their children. And this girl is not abused so much as neglected. And anyone in this Zoom room who has any experience with their children, their own children, other relatives, if you've been in a position to work or be around children much, you know how much children benefit from the fostering of all kinds of people, including the kindness of strangers. How children who are intelligent and have an imagination. When she's imagining in the first chapter, as she's in the back seat going off, looking up at the sky and going off to this unknown experience, not sure how long she's going to be there, she starts to imagine what the mother will do with her. She pictures herself there, she says. And I will tell you as good advice that anytime you read a piece of imaginative fiction, literary fiction, and you have a character who has an imagination, that's an important character in the book, whether they're a villain or a hero. When authors who have the imagination to create a book create a character who has an imagination and can imagine what they don't know, that's always a marker of distinction. Again, it can be an evil character. Iago in Othello has a remarkable imagination, but he's a villain. She has an imagination, this girl, that you see evidence of in the very first chapter. And so I know I'm not answering Sarah's question, but the fostering is not just about what this couple is doing now, but I think it's a statement about the fostering relationship, the fostering abilities of all kinds of people across all walks of life.
Mm.
Any of you know the novel she wrote after this, the novella, Small Things Like These, which I heartily recommend to you, another powerful book. Without spoiling anything, the issue there is about truly abused children, not neglected children the way this young girl is, but abused children. And someone who is not related to that, a child, uh, having to decide whether he's going to step up and have this girl who is in difficulty depend on the kindness of strangers when he's the stranger. And small things like these is a quote from the book that little things like doing a kindness to a stranger who's a child who has been abused is what the world depends upon. Remarkable books, both of them, and fostering, that is loving a child as your own when it's not your own, is something that goes on in the world all the time. Some of you may have been involved in that on one end or the other, parent or child.
Great. So Margaret's comment is the scene at the well where a hand reached up to pull her in was reminiscent of a water nymph, maybe a type of Celtic myth.
Thank you, Margaret. And Margaret, if you were with us for Woman Warrior, you may remember that she ends with talking about worry that the sprite, the dead spirit of the pregnant girl who drowned herself in a well to poison the community, the narrator imagines that that spirit is looking to pull her down as a substitute, that is, to exchange places and have that damnation, that hellish confinement underwater, be the fate of the narrator so she can escape. The fact that we see our reflection in water is a almost, well, I'm going to say universal image, and many Greek and Roman myths, and I'm sure Chinese and Celtic and Austrian and others, are based on the very simple fact that water reflects, that water is life-giving, but it's also threatening. Many people live their lives in a situation where water can kill you. And of course, that's the issue in this novel. And so she taps into, in this very small novel, a large mythological and psychological fact about the doubleness of water. And of course, the whole point of a mirror is that it's double. And if you were to read the first chapter with care, you would see that there are lots of images of mirrors, of seeing the car reflected in the mirror of the house, of the sky like a mirror, of her seeing herself in her imagination in the future. And of course, if you see yourself, that's an image of reflection. Mirrors in literature typically represent one or both of two things. One is vanity, that a mirror is an instrument of self-praise, of self-assessment in a vain way. And the other is an image of reflection, and I'm punning, in the sense of self-assessment. Take a good look at yourself in the mirror. Take a good look at yourself, someone will say. And in literature, a mirror can be one or both of those things, an image or instrument of vanity in the negative sense, or an image or instrument of self-inventory.
Right. So Chris says, great writing, like Where the Crawdads Sing, or like Flannery O'Connor said, the art of writing is the art of creating pictures. So when I put the pictures together, I reached my own ending to the story. She goes back home and says, quote, "No way, I'm out of here." And she runs out fast as her foster dad taught her to do, embraces him and calls him daddy. She climbs into the car with her foster mom, who had told her that she would never let her go. She's a heroine.
Well, I want to say that if you want to write who is that? Who said that?
Chris.
Chris. Uh, I don't know if you're a man or a woman, but either way, Chris, if you want to write a sequel, I say give it a shot. If you want to make a sequel to Foster, you can have at it. I think for me, and I'll say this so that people understand, when a novel, I'm going to say novel because we're talking about a novel today, but it could be true of a film or a play. When a novel ends without a resolution, you as a reader are not only allowed, but I would say invited to imagine the next chapter, the consequence of the irresolution. And unless there's something in the book as written that contradicts what you want to say, you're allowed as a reader to imagine the next chapter. That's how fiction works. Jane Austen famously would answer letters from inquirers who wanted to know, after Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy got married, did they have any children and what were they like? Jane Austen wrote letters telling them how many children and the names, and started writing a kind of quasi novel in letters to people, because that's the kind of writer and author she was with her reading base. Today, if someone were to write to a writer of literary fiction asking what happens at the end of fill in the blank, most authors would not condescend to answer it, or would say the novel ends where it ends. That's my job. And that's fair. But a reader's job is to read and to imagine. And if Chris imagines that a viable sequel could be her abandoning her family, I think that's fair. I don't agree with it. My view would be that she is understanding enough of her mother as a good person that she wouldn't do that to her, even if she has no particular close affinities with her siblings. I also think that the dynamic that was said before about wanting to see her father and not wanting to see her father, the fostering circumstance of this summer was perfect for her because it's a mix of being at home and being away. I think she would want another summer like that. I think her mother would want her to have another summer like that. And it's clear that the Constellers would take her in a moment. So I imagine a future for her where, until she reaches the age of independence, whatever that might be, she's in a fostering relationship with the Constellers and still living most of the time with her family.
Got it. So Janet had made a couple of comments that are connected. She said the ending of Foster is most moving. The girl running back and her uncle waiting for her and hugging her. And then she added a couple of minutes later, the ending signifies that her uncle takes her whenever she wants in her mind. He said to her, I take you wherever you want, Petal.
Yeah. So I agree. It's a remarkable ending. And if you read it to yourself after we're concluded, you will see that she does an interesting thing where she's hugging her foster father, even as she's warning him that her father is coming down the road after her. And it's not that I think she thinks there'll be violence, although it's not impossible. It's that she wants her foster father to know that this parting, which is very emotional, is not private. She's not running down the driveway to the mailbox in the Kinsella's farm. She's in her own house, in her own property, and her father is coming up from behind. And it's beautifully written so that it's not clear when she's saying da to her foster father and when she's identifying the da who's coming after her. It's very well done. And since it was Kinsella who convinced her that she should run, and like many men, I think this is a fair generalization. Certainly think it would be true of an Irish farmer in the 1980s. He thinks of children in terms of their physicality. You know, he's father to a boy, and he's not going to say, "Let's go in and practice on the piano." This is a stereotype, but I'm exploiting it. He's going to say, "You look like you have good, strong legs. I bet you could run fast. I bet you'd be the envy of any runner in the county." And he has the brilliant idea, because he's a good man and was surely a good father, to give her a way to gain self esteem without making it obvious, in the same way that the mother gives her a way to avoid embarrassment about the bedwetting without making it obvious. He has her try to improve her time, and she loves it. And again, those of you who are parents or fosters or adults in situations with children know how much children want to be thought well of by the adults they love. And it's a simple thing he does that just gave me gooseflesh at the kindness of this man to give this girl who has so little, relatively speaking, some kind of self esteem about accomplishment.
Okay. So Alan's got a comment. Couple of comments connected together. He says one of the key lines, I think, is, quote, "This is a different type of house. Here there is room to think." It is one of many two-edged reactions, such as, quote, "Her hands are like my mother's hands, but there is something else in them too, something I have never felt before and have no name for." And then, quote, "There are no secrets in this house." And then, quote, "Where there's a secret," she says, "there's shame, and shame is something we can do without." And then finally, he says, "She gets up and places the colander on the sink and lets out a sound I've never heard anyone make."
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. So I'm not sure I can remember and comment on all the things you said, but I will say that the idea that there are no secrets in this house, at one library meeting about this book, someone said, well, the parents have a son that died. Isn't that a secret? No, that's private. Every family, every person has the right to keep their private business private. That's not a secret. A secret is something that is being stored and kept in the sense of that quote, and not letting it be out because someone is embarrassed or ashamed of it. We have to remember too that with the bedwetter, we're talking about a young girl. She's obviously not new to bedwetting, and we know from experience with children and adults. I've dealt with bedwetting students at Yale, that it's one of the most embarrassing and often traumatizing things because of the associations people make with bathroom functions, and that's handled so beautifully. No shame in this house. When the father says after the party, where the girl realizes she's probably revealed too much to that nosy neighbor, he says, sometimes you don't have to say anything. And when she realizes, when her mother's asking her about why she seems to have a cold, what happened, and she lies by saying something other than the truth, she's learned something about the way the world can work in a self-preserving way. And I do think Alan's right. This is a different house. And again, one of my favorite short quotes is, new places require new words. And a very big part of maturation, as I suggested in the beginning, is when you go to someone else's house and they do something differently. I was raised, that foster family that I was raised in was Italian American, and Sunday dinner, every Sunday, the first course was a pasta dish, impossibly loaded with calories and carbohydrates, but that was only the first course. And the second course was always leg of lamb or roast beef or a ham or a chicken with vegetables. It was a feast every Sunday. And the first time I went to a friend's house who was not Italian American and had Sunday dinner, the mother served spaghetti and meatballs, and I ate a modest portion because it was the first course, and I knew that pork chops or steak was coming, except it wasn't. The mother must have asked me half a dozen times, Mark, don't you want to eat any more? No, I'm fine, because I was waiting for the second course, because that's the only kind of Sunday dinner I had ever had, 9 or 10 or 11 years old. There was no second course. And I went home and reported my amazement like I was Margaret Mead, like some kind of anthropologist coming back from the wild. You can't believe what these people do at Sunday dinner. They don't have a second course. I do think this story, in its quiet and beautifully subtle way, reminds us of how those differences register with an intelligent girl, intelligent child.
So actually, Kate's got a comment that relates to what you were just saying. She said, "I found Keegan's writing powerful because she's able to tell such an emotionally complex story with an economy of words. I could hear the author's voice in one of the lessons Kinsella shares with the girl, quote, "It's a perfect opportunity to say nothing." Then at the end of the novel, the girl chooses not to tell her mother about the incident at the well and thinks, quote, "It's my perfect opportunity to say nothing." And to me, that is also about Keegan trusting the reader by not overwriting the story.
Now, who is that again? Janet?
Kate, that's Kate.
Kate, wonderful comment, very insightful. I do think you nailed it exactly. I can't improve on that comment. I will say that we realize the novel is the narration of the young girl. So every word in the story, everything we know in the story, we know because the girl has told us. Um, it's even more sophisticated than the narrator in Woman Warrior, and much younger. And one of the things about first person narration is it privileges the character who's narrating by giving her something of the status of an author. Um, the reason Huck Finn is such a good narrator, the reason Holden Caulfield, I'm talking about children now, is such a good narrator is that they're remarkable children. And they're not just intelligent, even though they're young and they're limited in the knowledge of the world. They have a felicity with words and they have an understanding of how the imagination works. If not an understanding, at least they practice it. And when you read the book, if you stop and think, this page that I just read, that's being narrated by the child. If she's quoting one of the foster parents, if she's describing the room, she's doing it because she's been paying attention. And of course, paying attention is one of the hallmarks of an intelligent, imaginative child. You know that the children who impress you, I have a granddaughter who will soon be 6. I do think she is a remarkable child, not just because she's related to me, but she is very attentive. Um, like many children, she picks up lots of things in her wanderings. I mean, picks them up, hearing them, thinking about them. But more than most children, she's processing them. And children are fascinated by those kinds of discoveries. And when the foster father says, you know, you can say nothing, as if that's an active act of withholding, that hasn't occurred to her because she lives in a house where you probably have to speak to be heard. And you probably have to compete over the noise to get the last piece of bread or to tell the story you want to tell while your mother's distracted by another child. You have to say things all the time. The option of saying nothing hadn't occurred to her. She's also, I think, clearly a responsible girl, a good girl, who would want to say the truth if she could manage it. That a man who loves her, and it's clear by the time he gives her that advice, that they have a very strong foster parent child relationship. That such a man could say, you know, you have the option of saying nothing is liberating. I can't tell you all. I think you're all fellow travelers in your appreciation of this book, but it takes my breath away when I realize how economical this very short novella is, and how what a punch it carries. It's very Joycean in that way. Uh, Michael, how many people roughly are in the room today?
Looks like about 30.
Yeah, and at least 5 or 6 of you have made comments, and all excellent. And I'm hoping that those of you who haven't spoken yet, which is fine, also enjoyed the book because I do think it's a modern masterpiece.
And Sarah commented that she loved the small bits of information revealed little by little, and that it demands the reader to use their imagination to see the incidents clearer.
Yeah, and that again, that's one advantage to a short story. I know I've said this earlier in the program in the past weeks, but since we're wrapping up, I'll repeat it. Um, all literature has its advantages, but one thing that a short story can do that a big novel can't do is focus attention on 88 pages. and you are probably a better reader of 88 pages of this novel, that is the entire novel, than you are 88 pages of David Copperfield, because there's another 400 pages around it. And the same way that a opera of 3 hours length or a great musical play of 2 or 2.5 hours length has its advantages, there's something to be said for a 4 minute song played on the radio. You remember radio, or that you hear in your car, and the economy of a love song or a moving song about parents and children in 3.5 minutes has the advantage of concentration. It's not better because it has disadvantages too, but if you were to read this novel a second time, or if you have a housemate who would agree to read it out loud with you, you will see how beautifully crafted economically this remarkable work is. And let me say, Alan, the first comment Alan made was about something about this house. You have time to think. I think that's right. And that was the thing Alan said that I was impressed by but forgot. In Small Things Like These, the more recent novel about the man who has to decide if he's going to step up and help a girl who's being abused by people who should be caring for her, the narrator describes, and this is a third person narrator, that in the home preparing for Christmas, they have to make a list of gifts, they have to write letters to Santa, they have to bake the holiday cake, they have to do very busy, they have lots of things to do. It's a family with 4 or 5 daughters, all of whom are going to need to go to Catholic school with expensive tuition. And the narrator says of the man who's the hero, if only there were time, how much different would life be if he, this fellow, whose name is Bill, I think, Furlong, how much different would life be if he had time to think in between the many chores? He is an owner of a oil delivery service, heating oil, and he is not an executive. He is basically a delivery man going door to door, collecting accounts and delivering his product, wood and oil. And that's a remarkable statement, like the one that Alan quoted from this book, because one of the differences between people who are the working poor, who are surviving, but are the underclass, from people like most of us or all of us in this room who are the middle class, is that we have time to think. Think about how many people in the world, including people in the United States, including people in a well-to-do state like Connecticut, who would never have the time to attend this meeting. We're spending an hour today thinking, and we have a luxury that many of our fellow citizens will never know because they don't have time to think. And she understands that, and she knows that this child is someone who is a thinker and should be given the medium to thrive in by being in a home where you can think. Can you imagine what kinds of conversations happen in her home with her siblings and her parents that feed her imagination, her intellectual ability? It's no fault of the parents, it's certainly no fault of the mother, but it's the fate of many people who never get out. And we see her getting out for this summer.
Yeah. So here's a question a little bit different from how we've been discussing things. So Susan is asking, I guess in your opinion, why does Keegan not give the girl a name? We never learn her first name.
Yeah. So Susan, I don't know if you've been to earlier sessions with me, but I'm going to make the same revision I've been making for 30 or 40 years, and I feel like a voice crying in the wilderness. That's not the question I think students of literature should ask. This is my opinion, but I'll say it again. The question to ask is not, why did the author not give her a name? Because you can never get a true answer to that question. Even if Clare Keegan was your mother's best friend and agreed to write you a letter or send you an email that explained to you why she didn't do that or why she did that, will hold a name, she might be wrong. She might be lying. She might be being ironic. But there is a question you can ask, and there's a reader's question that you can answer. That is, what does it do to your experience, Susan, of reading the book not to have the girl have a name? You can answer that for yourself. If you're in a group like today and we had more time, we could discuss it and consider each other's opinions. That's a question you can always answer. You may not be right, but there's no way to prove you're wrong. I have an opinion in my own reading about why she doesn't have a name, and that is that names have associations. Um, the drunken father is John, the other father is Dan. John's a common name, Dan is less common. The mother, foster mother's name is Edna. The birth mother, is it Mary or May? I don't remember. Does anyone? The mother and father birth mothers have more conventional names. One reason not to give her a name, from my point of view as a reader, is I don't want to know her name. I want to know who she is. And I don't need to know her name to know who she is. And that he calls her by endearments, including Gaelic endearments, is much more moving than if he called her Tess or Eleanor or whatever her name might be. That's my answer to myself. And if I were in a group of other people who've read the book, a conversation might change my mind, but it will never be a final answer because there is no final answer. If you said to an author, how come in this book you named the villain Anthony? And that person would say, well, because I had an uncle when I was growing up named Anthony who was always kind of aloof and difficult. And I picked it because uh, he was the one I had in mind. You might say, but didn't you know other Anthonys? And what made you decide to pick someone you knew at all? Why not just invent a name? And that person, that writer, to be, if they were being honest, might say, you know what, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why I picked that name. I can tell you this is what I think, but I'm not sure. Intention is a myth that people, readers, think they can ascribe to authors. Authors intend to write a book, and they intend that it's going to be about the general issues that are raised in this beautiful story. But no author intends to write every sentence they write. That's not how imagination works. And I've given this example before, but if Michael keeps inviting me back, you're going to have to hear repetition. If I asked you, when you went to your doctor's appointment yesterday morning, did you intend to drive there the way you wound up driving there? Or did, in fact, you drive there on automatic pilot? Did you make a right hand turn where you usually don't make a right hand turn? Because in the back of your mind, below the level of intentionality, you realize you want to go past the bagel shop and get some bagels. Or you start to understand that it's getting near rush hour and it'd be probably better to get off the main road. That kind of thing happens all the time in everyday life about insignificant choices. We make them without intending to make them. Art works the same way. You can say Shakespeare intended for Iago to be a villain and Othello to be a hero who's kind of a schmo, but you don't believe that he intended to write every sentence the way he wrote it because art takes on its own momentum. That's the nature of art, especially the art of genius. Michael, where are we for time?
We are 8 minutes to 4.
Okay, good. I'm not running out of steam if you all aren't. I want to thank all of you for being such good commenters, questions or comments. I'm glad this story, our finale for the season, is bringing out so much interest. I can take other questions or comments.
So Lisa says, I am torn about whether to assume that everything in her real family's house is the opposite of the Kinsellas. For example, did her family of origin have secrets if the Kinsellas consciously didn't? It gave me a very ominous feeling about her return at the end of the summer visit throughout the story.
Yeah. So I will say that here's my advice for what it's worth. I know you're not asking for my advice. What's the name of this commenter?
Lisa,
Lisa with an L?
yes.
Lisa, here's my advice for what it's worth. Um, don't make the story melodramatic because it's not. Yes, there's a dead boy. Yes, there's some worry about the new experience she's going into. Yes, if you didn't know the story was being narrated by the girl, you might worry that she would die in the well. Well, she can't die in the well because there'd be no book. But the story is anti-melodramatic. That is to say, when the food drops down in the Kinsella's house, and Mrs. Kinsella and the birth father are neither of them bending down to pick it up, you might think there's going to be some kind of confrontation. Dan gets up and resolves the issue. You may think there's going to be some kind of fist fight or terrible scene at the end of the novel, at the end of the driveway. Well, there isn't. My advice, again, for what it's worth, is that I don't think there are extreme melodramas. Her home life is not wretched, it's just impoverished. Does she have good times with her siblings? Do they play games? Do they laugh? Do they tell that? Yes, I think they have the kind of childhood that people without means manage to have all the time because of their love, because of the attentiveness, because of the resilience and imagination of children. I was raised in a very poor background. I had a wonderful childhood, and I'm sure that's true of many people. So I would not harbor a melodramatic or worrisome feelings that because they have no secrets, it by implication means that in her house there are secrets. Her father's drunkenness, her father's inability to pay, must be known to any of the children who are old enough to be paying attention. It's certainly a shame for the mother, and certainly the Kinsellas know something about it and know more now when Mrs. Kinsella has offered to send money to her relative. And the girl rightly says, my mother won't mind, but my father will mind. And she gets it. I think the beauty of the novel is it could take the position that this is a hard case, melodramatic story. It's not. It is a very sweet story without being sentimental. It looks like there's going to be a tragedy around that well, but there isn't, although there was previously. It looks like that nosy neighbor who walks her home is going to be someone who mucks up the works. It turns out that with brief advice from Dan, it's okay to say nothing. The girl not only gets it, she practices it later on in the story. I think it's a story that is very comfortable in a positive sense, not a mindless sense.
Great. So a couple of connected comments from Janet. Um, I felt that I was inside the girl, seeing, feeling, hearing all that she does. And then her last comment after that was that at the end of Foster, the girl and the uncle see three lights at sea.
Yes,
I think they represent the girl, the uncle, and the aunt bound together.
yes. Who is it who said that comment?
Janet.
Janet, you're a genius. That's another good comment. And Janet, you may have realized that earlier in that chapter, when they're down, there's only two lights earlier, and then there are three, as if it's the two or whatever that is, maybe the couple of the foster parents, and then three. I do think that is a symbol of this kind of coming together. And I'll say something else in comment to having whoever said I got a worrisome feeling that maybe there are secrets and what the girl's life is at home. And I need to compliment myself as a grandfather, but you're just going to have to live with that. Some months ago, maybe over a year ago, my granddaughter, I have other grandchildren, but she was my first, and she's about to be six, as I said, realized when she went to school, pre-K, that she had mismatched socks. It was when she was about 4, and her mother allowed her to pick out her clothes and put on her own clothes. She was old enough to do that. And she came home from school, and I was at her house, and told me that some of the kids were mocking her for having socks that didn't match. She wasn't traumatized, it wasn't terrible, but it made her uncomfortable, and she felt silly. And I said, these socks look like they match to me. Both of them fit on your feet, don't they? They both feel very comfortable. Why do they have to have the same pattern? And I made a point that the next time I went to her house, I wore mismatched socks. I wore my socks aren't very um, fashionable, but I wore a brown sock and a blue sock. And I told her about it. And I said that I decided that day, based on her experience, that I would mismatch my socks. And she loved it. And of course, sometimes in the near future, she would pick mismatched socks. Now, it's not genius. Many parents would have that kind of insight, but it's the kind of thing that requires nothing but attentiveness to children, and of course, a couple of pairs of socks.
So someone had a question. They don't have a login name, which is fine. But they had a question, a little bit of question or confusion about the ending, and I'm just wondering, they they were asking, they were a little confused about who exactly the girl calls daddy. And I'm just wondering, if do you think that there's any kind of lack of clarity about that at the end of it?
Well, I think it's meant to be ambiguous because she's dealing with two fathers at once, which she's never had to do. And I think we're supposed to be not confused, but in a position where we can't decide. Confusion is a negative thing. I think we're supposed to see that she's talking to one father out of the endearment of the parting, at the same time that she's identifying the other party, and she may be talking about the birth father, not to him. I think it's meant to be purposely ambiguous. I don't think we have to be confused because confused suggests that you want to resolve the confusion. I think it's a very rich kind of ambivalence. Um, when Amelia in Othello is knocking on the door to warn her mistress, Desdemona, that her husband, Othello, is out to kill her, um, the knocking on the door is Amelia yelling, my Lord, meaning her master, Othello, my Lord, open up, let me in. She said, my Lord, my Lord. And Desdemona, being strangled in her bed at the same moment, is yelling out, my Lord, meaning God, spare me this death. And in a well directed production, Amelia's voice, my Lord, Othello, open the door, is overwhelmed by Desdemona's prayer in dying, my Lord, my Lord. And it is masterful about that exchange. It's not confusing, but the ambiguousness is rich.
Great. Well, Mark, we got one more comment, so let me pass it along. Lori says she really likes when the girl and her foster father are running on the dune and the beach, and they are searching for the footprints to find their way back. And they only see one set of tracks, hers, and he says to her, you must have carried me there. It reminds me of that classic story of Jesus carrying people when they're struggling. Very moving.
Yes, and that famous poster, that was Lori?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I think that's exactly right. I had the same reaction. And let me say that the person who said earlier, um, oh, you said something about the story that I was going to end with, but now I fear I've forgotten it. But well, I want to say again, I think the story's great advantages are its modesty in presentation, but its richness in the reverberation of all that's going on. And oh, here's what I wanted to remember. Somebody said, I'm sorry I can't keep you all straight because I have no faces to go with your lovely comments. that she felt she was inside the girl's head and knew everything she was thinking. And of course, that's because the whole book is inside her head. But I think we are more likely to feel inside her if we don't have her name, because the name will be a kind of wall that we might have associations with that will stop us from having free entry into her mind. You don't need to know her name to have access to her thoughts. And if her name was Brunhilde, or her name was um, Hedda, or fill in the blank, whatever it might be, you might have associations with that that without even realizing it would not have you be as conversant with her thinking as you do when she's nameless. So I'll stop there and thank you all again. Lots of good comments. I'm sure many of you who are attending and not commenting had similar thoughts. I thank Michael once again for all his help and partnership, and the Wilton Library for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure as usual, Mark. Thank you so much for this. It's been a great series. And thanks everybody for coming, whether it was in the evenings for the first half or in the afternoons for the second half. Mark and I are already talking about the series for the fall, and it's going to be great. And I think that pretty much does it.
Thank you. Enjoy the summer, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.